to our open meeting. We're just letting all of you in from the waiting room, so we'll just give it a minute and then we will get started. We've got a really packed program today. We're going to take you a little bit through some of the work of the National Retrofit Hub over the last few months, some of our priority projects. And then we are so grateful to have three incredible speakers who are going to talk around three different topics. So we'll get into that in a minute. My name is Sarah Edmonds, and I'm one of the co-directors at the National Retrofit Hub. And today we are here with also my co-director, Rachel.
Hi everyone, yeah, I'm Rachel, I'm Sarah's co-director. We are currently in the same space, so hopefully you don't get too much feedback between us. But yeah, there's lots of you on the call, but please do feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Um, Session's being recorded and we'll share this with anyone who does miss the session. So yeah, if you'd like to, you can keep your cameras off, but you're very welcome to have them on. And yeah, we'll be using some breakout rooms later, so there'll be plenty of opportunity to have a bit of a discussion. But yeah, nice to be here. Thanks. Back to you, Sarah.
Thanks. And we've also got Ben, Jason, and Talisa from the Hub supporting us here. We will keep an eye on the chat. If everybody can stay muted throughout, that would be great. And then we will have breakout sessions after we've heard from our speakers where you can really engage more with people in the room and each other. So yeah, let's get started. I'm going to share my screen, or I'm going to attempt to anyway. And we will take you through our updates. Okay, so um, yeah, I think this is open meeting number 4. At least that's what I have written down. Um, and we are just going to, for those of you who are not familiar with us, well, we'll do that in a second. So, sorry, my slides are not responding when I click. This is what you can expect from the session. So we're going to give you a brief as possible progress update, and then you're going to hear three speakers on three different topics, as I mentioned. So we're going to hear from Emma Pfeiffer from Dark Matter Labs talking about retrofit and climate resilience, Nazia Azad from the Centre for Aging Better on retrofit and social justice, and Alistair Brennan Dixon of Collective Works. And we're going to hear from Alistair about retrofit and ethics. Then we were going to move into a breakout session for half an hour where we'll have conversations around what within those topics should the NRH be focusing on and what is our role in that space and who else we should be speaking to or working alongside within those topics. And we'll come back into the main room at 1:20 for a summary of what's come up in those conversation spaces, and then we'll close out and we can all go and have some lunch. So yes, a little bit about the NRH, just briefly. We're a non-profit collaborative organisation, and we're essentially doing whatever we can to enable the local delivery of retrofit at scale. And I think what we will be touching on as well is how that is equitable in every way that we have within our capabilities. So the role and the purpose of the NRH has been, since we were established in 2023, to convene stakeholders and tackle barriers, to connect and amplify the sector, to really try and act as the glue between a lot of the incredible work that is happening across the sector, but also to be able to advance our thinking collectively and to coordinate efforts so that we're making the most of all of that work that's happening and we're not seeing any kind of wasted energy or duplication of efforts where possible. Ooh, slides have a mind of their own today. And we have been providing independent insights and tools. So we've moved into this sort of practical output delivery, and you'll find lots of really useful outputs on our website. And we are supporting government delivery insofar as we sit on the Warm Homes Plan Expert Advisory Panel. And I'm sure we're all waiting with bated breath to see what is in that when it arrives. Um, we have, from our inception, had these 6 working groups, and most of them are largely dormant at the moment, not because we're not busy with other work, but because throughout the process of working over the first couple of years with the working groups and the delivery of the outputs that each have created, we've actually realized that there were a lot of cross-cutting themes, so themes that came up across all of those working groups. And so whilst working group 6 actually is really still active now, the others have sort of focus their energies into some of the cross-cutting themes, which I'm going to show you now. So those cross-cutting themes are financing outcomes and impact, community retrofit, place-based approaches, heritage and whole life carbon, EPCs and minimum energy efficiency standards, and procurement. The green boxes are all active and live as cross-cutting themes. The sort of dark green, blackish boxes are in the development stage, and then our EPCs and MEs, the work stream there is complete for now. There've been some pretty hefty resources that have been delivered out of that project that Rachel knows all about. So we might talk a little bit about those later. If any of these are of interest to you, you can get in touch. You can let us know if you want to be part of those. You can email us. You can go to the website and you can tell us what one you're interested in. So those cross-cutting themes, I'll just explain on the middle one here to you because this is really live for me at the minute in the community retrofit one. So we have always felt that community retrofit is an important area for us to try and find ways to support. And in our last open meeting, when we asked all of you to let us know what you thought we should be focusing on within the cross-cutting themes, this one came out as a really high priority. So we've had 2 meetings already with a wider group of people who have said they were interested in that. We have 3 different organizations who are coordinating that. That's People Powered Retrofit, CSE, Centre for Sustainable Energy, and Home Energy Action Lab. They've been really, really engaged workshops. We've had quite a high number of attendees in those, and we've got the beginnings of an insights paper underway and some other activity as well. Actually, I'll not jump on and hand over to you, Rachel.
Thanks so much, Erin. Yeah, so another one of our cross-cutting themes is on financing outcomes and impact. This group is slightly less far along than the community retrofit one. So far, we've had one really great session with people signed up for that meeting, and it's being coordinated by the GFI and Domna. We're really interested to explore how funding models can better capture the full range of retrofit benefits. So thinking about not just improvements in energy efficiency, but if a retrofit might, for example, lead to reduced rental arrears or reduce maintenance costs or improve health of residents or even improved home valuation and how those things might unlock more streams of funding. We're looking at ways that we can sort of learn from existing approaches. So there are already some landlords out there who are using additional benefits from retrofit to help make financial decisions. So we're looking at how we can share some of that knowledge. But also what changes need to happen in the financial system, what evidence do the finance providers need in order to sort of demonstrate some of these benefits. So we've been a little bit quiet on that group since our last meeting, but we've been thinking in the background and hopefully we'll be meeting in January to sort of come up with some next steps. We've also got another cross-cutting theme on place-based approaches. So this one is being led by my colleague Talisa, who's on the call, and we're doing work on this one in partnership with the EDRC and UKGBC, and it's being supported by the MCS Foundation. We're really looking at what sort of is the definition of a place-based approach, and how can they be better enabled across the whole of the UK. So we're looking to produce some sort of tools, case studies, a component matrix that people can use to start engaging more in place-based. And we're also looking at kind of what are the strengths of place-based and how can place-based approaches overcome some of the issues that our State of the Nation report last year uncovered on sort of more business as usual retrofit approaches. For that one, we will be launching some tools at the end of February. But in the meantime, we're engaging with lots of people in this space and we'll be doing some sort of interviews and visits in January and February next year. So please do, watch this space for some resources coming out of that one in the new year. On heritage and whole life carbon, this is a group that we haven't set up yet, but we know that it's a theme that lots of people want to engage on. So we're hoping to get something started in Q1 of next year. We really want to think more about the sort of long-term impacts of the work that we do in terms of robustness, the environment, and we see the link between the way we treat our heritage buildings and whole life carbon considerations to be quite strongly linked. particularly if we're thinking about sort of long-term impacts and the sort of robustness of our homes, but also thinking about sort of more breathable, locally sourced natural materials that are suitable for the vernaculars of some of our historic stock. So that one should be starting soon. As Sarah mentioned, we've been doing a lot of work over the last year and a half on EPCs and minimum energy efficiency standards. We convened a number of workshops and responded to consultations on both EPCs and MEES in England and Scotland. We've also been publishing some reports on the private rental sector, which we'll talk through in a moment. So yeah, that one's kind of closed at the moment, but yeah, we're open if there's more happening at a policy level, we'll definitely start re-engaging. And then on procurement, we held a great session to sort of scope out what we might do in this space, because there are so many different avenues that we could take in the procurement work stream that would help the retrofit industry. We know that Ashton are leading a project with Efficiency North, which we're engaged with, called Retrofit Futures, which is looking at how better procurement can support the development of skills and jobs. So we'll be focusing on some of the other areas of procurement. Social value was a really big one that came up. We were also talking about the role of community in procurement and also how SMEs can be better supported to engage in retrofit procurement. So yeah, we sort of summarized lots of the sort of insights that we got from that initial meeting. And once again, we'll be kicking off a bit more work on that in the new year. We're now going to take you through some of our key projects just to give you a bit of an insight into some of the funded work that we're doing. These are really where we get the chance to do a bit more of a deep dive into a specific topic, using our same approaches, research, lots of collaboration, workshops, literature reviews, bringing together all the insights that we're hearing from the industry and trying to come up with either insights, tools, or reports that sort of usefully push the conversation along. So if we go to the next one. So over the course of the last year and a half, we've been doing a project that's been supported by Impact on Urban Health, all about incentivizing retrofit in the private rental sector. At the start of this year, we released a report on all of the support that's needed in the PRS, all the way from advice to finance. And then in the latter half of the year, we've really been focusing on the minimum energy efficiency standards. And we released two reports, one of which looks at the standard themselves and getting that right. So we talked about the metrics within the standards, the exemptions, and the potential to achieve positive outcomes. And that report was authored by our colleague Cara Holmes, who was on secondment and has now gone back to citizens advice. And then we released a report which was really looking at the wider system. So if MEES is well implemented and the standard itself is designed well, what are the other pieces of infrastructure that are needed to make sure that the whole rental sector is kept fair and robust? So we talk in this one about rental affordability and security. We talk about the treatment of tenants and how they need to be supported. We talk about enforcement, the quality of work and redress routes, and also more widely about sort of the stable housing supply chain across tenures. So thinking about what might happen if these sorts of standards encourage private landlords to leave the sector and what are potential routes for tenure shift. So yeah, both available on our website. Please do go and check them out and have a download and a read of them. If we go into the next slide. We're also working on a project called Retro Net Zero. So this is in collaboration with a number of organisations that you can see across the bottom. The objective of this is to really enable the adoption of innovation in net zero domestic retrofit. And we're using what's called a regulatory science approach. And we're really focusing on innovation in products and materials, building services and processes and techniques. Go to the next one. So within this project, we've already launched a series of reports which are available on a dedicated website, which I'll put in the chat once I've finished speaking. There's some innovation adoption pathways which give people who are innovating an understanding of what types of regulation they need to pass through in order to bring their product to market. There's a regulatory science service provider directory, so you can see a snapshot of that on the right. So if you've got a solution and you need to get it tested, this gives you some ideas of who you might be able to go to get those tests done. We released something on realizing the co-benefits of net zero retrofit, so thinking about how innovative products and solutions can deliver benefits beyond net zero. And then there's also a report on natural fibre insulation, and particularly how legislation in the EU is helping to increase the adoption of that type of innovation. There's a couple of resources soon to be launched. One will be a statistical analysis tool. So that's really to help innovators understand how many trials and how many sort of pieces of evidence they might need in order to get into Appendix Q within the SAP process. And then there's a report that's been produced by the National Energy Foundation all about consumer protection relating to the sizing of heat pumps. So they should be released within the next month. Go to the next one. What our role in this project has really been about, though, is thinking about whether regulation could do more to incentivize and enable innovations that deliver benefits beyond net zero. If we go to the next one, you'll see that the part of the report that we released included a selection of potential types of benefits that could be triggered by innovative products and solutions that go beyond net zero. And while this is pretty comprehensive, I'm sure that there are still some additional ones that we've missed. If we go to the next slide. We have been focusing on three that we think are really prescient at the moment: risk of damp and mold, indoor air quality, and thermal comfort. Go to the next slide. And what we sort of found out in our first piece of work is actually there are quite a lot of really good regulations around the health of homes. The Housing Health and Safety Rating System, for example, the Decent Home Standard. The regulations do define the benefits and hazards quite well, but they're not always particularly outcomes based. They're not always particularly well applied or enforced. Awareness of them isn't always that high, and there aren't particularly adequate routes for innovative products and solutions to demonstrate that they help you comply with some of the regulations that are out there. So we go to the next slide. What we're doing now is really looking at the fact that there's a lot of legislative change happening. So Awaab's law has just come in, the Decent Home Standard is being updated, minimum energy efficiency standards are being updated and applied to the social rented sector. The renters' rights bill is coming in. The focus on health in homes is really growing. And at the same time, the procurement rules have changed. The Procurement Act 2023 is really helping to make sure that SMEs are brought into procurement processes. It's aiming to drive innovation and better outcomes. And we see this as a sort of potential opportunity to make sure that procurement teams know about how to specify or get innovation on their projects that can lead to some of these benefits. So innovations that might lead to benefits, for example, might be an insulation that's more breathable or has the capacity to regulate humidity or has a higher thermal mass, leading to higher thermal comfort. They might be active systems, which include managing indoor air quality. There might be better sensor and measuring technologies that help us to plan works. There might be finishes that have positive indoor air quality benefits. These are just a few. So if we go to the next slide, what we're doing at the moment is looking at how we can support local authorities and housing providers who do procurement to engage with some of these innovative solutions, and at the same time enable innovators to be able to better demonstrate how their product helps achieve these benefits so that they can work more readily together and we can sort of increase the uptake of some of these solutions and therefore improve people's health. So yeah, if you're an innovator on the call and have a product or solution that does lead to health benefits, we'd really like to hear from you because we want to hear about what your experiences are like procuring. And equally, if you're a procurement team that we haven't spoken to that is really interested in how you can overcome some of the challenges around health and well-being, we'd like to speak to you as well. So we make sure that we produce resources that are useful for you. And I'll pass back over to you, Sarah.
Great. Yeah, so I'm going to talk to you about two projects and then we're going to hear from our speakers. So I'll go through these quite quickly. And I will fly through this one because there is a webinar that you can look at like half an hour worth to get this whole picture. But I want to talk to you about Retrofit Connect. And this is really all about moving responsibly into the community retrofit space. So in 2023, our objectives included pathways for replicable community-driven retrofit initiatives are available and supported. Insights that came through our State of the Nation report and other work in Working Group 5 around delivery and Working Group 6 around driving uptake. We're pointing towards this need, and also through building relationships and supporting active communities through our relationships in Retrofit Reimagined with a range of collaboration partners. Again, community retrofit initiatives were really a big priority. So some of you will be familiar with the Retrofit Reimagined series of events and culmination in a film. If you scan this QR code, you can watch that back. It's an 18-minute film that really tells the whole entire story of several years of work between a range of partners. Um, and this was led by Civic Square, organization based in Birmingham, but also with partners, Dark Matter Labs, Emma, of course, is on the call, and We Can Make, Retrofit Balsall Heath, like just a range of partners were involved in that. And it was asking the question, what if the climate transition and retrofit of our homes and streets was designed, owned, and governed by the people who live there? So really trying to reimagine retrofit as a movement that is around what it takes to deliver thriving communities up and down the country. And that came to an end at the end of 2023 and into 2024 were ongoing conversations about, well, what next for this movement, because there was a huge momentum built up behind it. So long story short, we were invited as the National Retrofit Hub to provide a supporting role in a street demonstrator and street incubator program. And we are sort of halfway through that program, I would say. And the three street demonstrator organizations are Civic Square, We Can Make and Retrofit Balsall Heath, and the street incubators are Portland In Project in Stoke, Home Baked Community Land Trust in Liverpool, Home Energy Action Lab in London, East Marsh United in Grimsby, Wessex Community Assets, and Planet Cheltenham. And the way that program has been playing out is that we've been running sponge sessions, which are opportunities for us to be in full-on listener mode with the different community groups through one-to-one sessions and just sort of hearing what are the issues that are becoming most prescient for them. Being part of and helping to facilitate through time together of in-person events and site visits and moments of sort of celebration and reflection. And they prove to be so powerful as moments to come together and sort of learn from each other. And of course, all of that sort of has peer learning opportunities within it. But then our role really comes into play with the clinics, the sort of deep dives into specific topics. And we had a sort of idea in this moment where we saw the richness and wealth of knowledge within our broader network and the need that so many people often have and the desire that so many people have to actually support people in place and to sort of be close to the action, like where stuff's actually happening. And so we thought that we would launch our retrofit community of industry to sort of formalize the process of bringing our network closer to active community retrofit initiatives that are testing stuff live and on the ground. And what was sort of behind that as well was the notion of expanding the idea of community in retrofit beyond neighborhood groups, but to include the industry itself as a collaborative network. And really that became like quite a momentous thing because we put that out as an invitation to our network through a form. And if you haven't heard of this and you would like to be part of our retrofit community of industry, then again is another QR code for you to scan. We will share all this afterwards. But we sort of set out a pledge, and over 120 organizations have come forward already to say, yeah, we really want to be part of this movement. The lowest touch commitment on the pledge is to amplify the stories of all of these organizations to really surface that activity, but also to share any open resources, which we are also in the process of building out some directories of useful information. To give any time where you can. And we have the first of our deep dive sessions into one of our technical themes, which is around land and housing stewardship. And that's happening on the 10th of December. So we've been prepping around that. But also to go further, people have come forward and said, but actually, we'd really like to help in a more intentional way. We'd like to give some time. We'd like to support. We'd like to understand what we could be doing in our own local area. Can you help us unearth ways in which we can be active in our local area? And also some people have come forward to say that they may be able to facilitate and be part of research and development projects. So it's become a real movement in and of itself. So if you are interested in becoming part of that and want to know more about that, then do scan that QR code. And I think for all of you who've already done that, you'll be receiving some updates imminently. We've been working away in the background about the ways in which your commitment and your pledge can come to fruition. So that's really exciting. Um,
And
and if
just
you
to
want to,
say,
yeah.
um, those QR codes have been deactivated, but we've put links in the chat, so
Oh,
you can follow
excellent.
those links. Who knew?
That'll be totally my fault because I have been talking about this so much that I probably didn't test the QR code. So, but thank you for bringing that to our attention. And most of the things you can find if you search our website or if you email us. So, apologies for that. So, then this QR code is probably also not activated. No, this one works. Woohoo! Okay, this one is where you can get a whole story of how all of these bits of work connect together. And I'm not going to repeat it here, but the things that we mentioned around Retrofit Connect in the community of industry, the place-based work that Rachel talked about, and our community cross-cutting theme, we did a really eloquent job, if I do say so myself, of explaining that with slides in this webinar that you can look at for half an hour. And Rachel Hayden, our head of marketing and comms, did a really good job of asking me some quite focused questions about it. So that's really useful. And that's basically how it works. I'm kind of conscious of time. We've gone over a little bit, so I'm just going to fly right through measuring outcomes and impact evaluation. This project is really about broader outcome measurement and why it's important to do that, particularly to maximize co-benefits like health and equity. We work with project partners Arup, Impacts in Urban Health, and Trustmark here, but also throughout the project have um, brought Centric Lab and Royal Academy of Engineering into the fold, and we've been collaboratively working together. Um, Essentially, at the basis of this is asking, like, what does success look like in retrofit programs? Is it measuring carbon, fuel poverty, and measures, which are all vital, but not the whole picture? And should it also be broader than that to help with the narrative, to increase people's awareness, and to just deliver better successful outcomes for people? So we've had a number of outputs from this project, including these innovator profiles. They're published, they're on our website. You can find them there. We also had some stakeholder engagement workshops where we wrote up the reflections from those and learning as we go to always sort of capture that resource and time that people are giving us through sharing their insights. And we also did some baselining, which was to look at and building on our Retrofit State of the Nation report to say, well, what are we measuring and what are we not measuring in all of these programs? And what does that tell us? So there's a really interesting kind of like baselining output that we published. And what's really exciting is that imminently we will be publishing a collaborative piece with Centric Lab, which is a community health impact assessment workbook. And this essentially is to account for the nuance of place and the needs of a community based on their own assessment of how the health of their place manifests, so that when policy lands in a place, it's better fitted to what the needs of a community are. So watch this space for that. And I am conscious that I'm rattling through this. There's a lot to take in, but just watch this space and get in touch because all of those outputs are on our website. Um, Again, I think this is just to show the impact that those outputs are having and how many people are viewing the inputs, the outputs, the inputs, the outputs, the outputs that we're publishing. I'm rushing now because I'm conscious we have three really great speakers that I really want to give most of the time over to, plus the breakout session with all of you. And we really want to hear from you and your views. So suffice it to say that the outputs that we're publishing are obviously doing something useful because lots of you are looking at them and downloading them. So thank you for that. So now, a couple of minutes later than hoped, but we're going to hand over to Emma from Dark Matter Labs, and Emma's going to take us through retrofit and climate resilience as it shows up in their work. So I will stop sharing and hand to you, Emma.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. Can you see my black screen?
Yes, we can see your black screen.
Okay, great. Um, yeah, so thank you so much for the introduction and for having me here today. As Sarah said, I'm going to be talking about retrofit and resilience, or to sum it up in one question, how do we think about the scale and implications of the future we're retrofitting for, and how do we build future readiness in the places that we live? So my team works on housing, energy, and materials as components of the transition that this moment calls for. So today I'm hoping to touch on how we understand retrofit as a process deeply entangled in our planetary systems and how retrofit needs to play a part in reinforcing our future well-being. In the context of our work, we work on retrofit as part of this interscalar approach, with the idea being that in supporting the links between our civic economies, our bioregions, and the planetary commons, resilience at each of these scales serves to reinforce the others. And at Dark Matter Labs, we do this by building common assets and working toward better modes of stewarding our resources. Today, I'm going to be focusing mostly on this document, 3 Degree Neighborhood, which was part of the Retrofit Reimagined ecosystem of events and discussions that Sarah mentioned before. We published this in 2024 in collaboration with Civic Square. And this publication sets out the risks faced by UK urban neighborhoods this century in the face of climate and ecological breakdown. So this publication, I'll share a link in the chat afterwards, but really constitutes a vision of what we might be preparing for. This is just a bit of background to show some of the research that informed our findings here, coming from research within and without Dark Matter Labs, some really important work that preceded what we published. So where do we stand? This graph, which shows global mean surface temperature rise across the Earth since the Industrial Revolution, shows us that we're now in a state where we're passing planetary systems tipping points at an accelerating rate, bringing about changes from which the planet can't recover. Many climate experts have pointed to the need to limit global average surface heating to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. This is sort of about where net zero would land us. However, it's looking likely that we'll break this threshold within the coming decade, while the trajectory set by current policies makes it more than likely that we'll hit 3 degrees by 2100. And in fact, current pledges make it more likely than not that we will still reach climate breakdown. So even our most ambitious targets would force us to continue fighting to stay on the right side of irreversible tipping points. All this to say, in the face of evidence that continues to mount around the scale of the emergency, it's important that we don't turn our heads away from scenarios that a few decades ago seemed like the worst case possible outcomes. We're looking at a 3-degree scenario head on as much as we'd like to avoid it as a way of pointing ourselves toward ambitious climate action and proactive, radical reimagination of the places that we live, seeing as this is all happening within the scale of one lifespan. So what does this lived experience of a 3-degree future look like? The 3-degree average surface temperature rise across the Earth actually translates to 8-degree hotter summers in UK cities. This comes hand in hand with other risks, as I'm sure many we're all aware, spanning drought, flooding, cold winters, and the impacts on quality and cost of living that these incur. So this is the context in which we're viewing the relationship between retrofit and planetary resilience. These are the stakes for people and for planet. This is actually an animation, and I, again, will share the link in the chat when I'm done presenting. But this shows how the human climate niche is shrinking rapidly. In the animation, you can see that while this green zone representing suitable climates for human inhabitation shrinks, and the UK is sort of the last to experience some of these changes, the scale of global impact and entanglement means that things like food supplies, supply chains, and migration patterns will make the changing inhabitability of Earth felt here sooner. And additionally, this urges a much longer conversation, but this needs to be considered within the context of historic responsibility for extraction, the violence of colonialism, and carbon emissions over the preceding centuries. Meanwhile, we know that the felt impacts of climate change are already exacerbating existing inequalities and will continue to do so. And I'm sure that the following speakers will have more to say on this, so I won't go into it too much. So a lot of this comes down to the form and material makeup of the places that we live. This map of the Birmingham region shows how the current heat risk and heat island effect in the city um, brings brings this risk to be apparent at the neighborhood scale, as shown by these pockets of high risk in red. And secondly, those of you familiar with Birmingham will recognize that this map loosely overlaps with indicators of deprivation in the city. So heat risk, like many of the other challenges cities face today and will continue to face in the future, is not evenly distributed. Um, so climate breakdown and global temperature rise are symptoms of a problem, but we'd say that resilience needs to get to the source of this problem rather than treating the symptoms. Um, However, even our most ambitious targets might lead to exponential extraction, and decarbonization strategies are often justified as a means to grow markets and GDP. But the demand for decarbonization materials will require a significant increase in mining and processing, which is a bit of a contradiction from how we usually think about the decarbonization transition. Meeting net zero targets by 2050 would require 6 times more mineral input over the next 2 decades as opposed to what we use today. And the production and processing capacity of these materials are predominantly located in countries of instability, associated with corruption and conflict. And at the same time, these are the areas that, in many cases, are most in need of regeneration to balance the Earth systems. So when we think about low carbon materiality and transitions away from fossil fuels, there's a tangle of other factors that form a part of this picture. So what does this mean for retrofit and house building? It's not just about how we build, but how we envision retrofit. It's not also just about how many homes get retrofit or what materials they use. Even today's ways of building bespoke low carbon homes far exceed where we need to be in terms of embodied carbon. To get to a place where we're within the UK's carbon budget, depending on how you do the calculations, we need to do all of these things in green. So it's a whole systems change um, around retrofit and house building. So just to note, the figures on the slide are about new build housing, but the processes underlying the shift apply for retrofit too. So without radically transforming how we design, build, use, reuse, and live in the built environment, we won't be actively working toward meaningful resilience at scales from local to global. As part of the research, we envisioned 6 ways to change neighborhood fundamentals. These are particularly touching down in Civic Square's work in Birmingham. But we thought that these factors outline the kind of localized transition that builds resilience in communities alongside supporting the resilience of ecological systems. So here you'll see that retrofit is one among the 6, but really all of these approaches blend together, overlap, and reinforce one another. And just to touch on our vision for retrofit as a possible way forward, our vision of retrofit is aimed to lay out how building resilience in place is a layered process. For buildings and their uses, we focus on the use of bio-based materials that are responsibly sourced, designing for dismountability, and the potential for adaptation. Atop this, we envision retrofit design and assessment that bears in mind greater urban temperature fluctuations as well as other risks, while using monitoring and other means to keep our strategies up to date with the latest thinking in building performance. And finally, all of this needs to be supported by knowledge and skills to bolster forward-thinking retrofit action among its essential actors, residents, institutions, and experts. So how can we reimagine retrofit to support future readiness for people and planet? I will leave you all with that question and look forward to hearing from the other speakers.
Thank you, Emma. It's already been kicking off some great questions in the chat. So for anybody who did have questions for Emma and is keen to explore those things further, then you can join the particular breakout room that Emma and I will be in after we've heard from the speakers. So we're going to hand over to Nazia now. Thanks, Nazia.
Hi, thanks, Emma. That was an incredible start to the guest speakers. I feel a bit nervous following up from that. If you just give me one moment, guys. For some reason, my brain isn't braining today, so the thought of sharing my screen is actually causing me much distress. But if
Well, it appears that you are absolutely nailing that.
Oh
So
my
well done,
gosh,
you.
that's it. That's it. I can go home. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. My name is Nazia Azad, and I work for the Centre for Aging Better, which is, for those of you who may not know, a charity dedicated to ensuring that society enables all of us to age well. Now, my expertise is in housing, with a particular focus on the experiences of racially minoritized communities. And today, whilst I won't be speaking directly to Retrofit, I will be talking about social justice and the people in the stock that we're continuously talking about in terms of retrofit. Um, and I'm hoping that it will allow you to reflect on how this aligns with your priorities and how it can be incorporated within NRH's work going forward. In October, we launched the first qualitative research exploring the experiences of older racially minoritized communities in England and their experiences of home improvement services. And what I plan to do today is take you through a high-level tour of what we found and highlight some recommendations that we believe could help unlock a more just approach to improving homes across the country. Um, Before I do that, I just want to share the current landscape with you. Older people from racially minoritized backgrounds are far more likely to live in poor quality housing, face barriers to support, and experience inequalities rooted in systemic racism and long-term institutional neglect. They're around 5 times more likely than white older people to experience housing deprivation. So that's, no basic facilities, shared living arrangements, and so on. And for some communities, this is even more stark. So, over a third of older Bangladeshi people and more than a quarter of older Black African people live in these conditions. Housing quality also differs sharply for minoritized communities. 38% of Black and minority ethnic households have at least one major housing problem, compared to just 25% of white households. And damp is a major issue, affecting nearly 9% of Black-led homes, which is more than double the rate for white-led households. And tenure, the type of housing you live in, adds another layer of inequality. Racially minoritized people are more likely to rent privately, which is the sector that's most associated with non-decent homes and insecurity of tenure. And when combined with long-standing financial inequality, many people just find themselves doubly exposed to poor living conditions and for fewer resources to improve them. Now, at the Centre for Aging Better, we believe that home improvement and adaptation services are essential for keeping people safe of all ages and keeping people warm and well in their homes. And they help people repair, adapt, maintain their homes, and make them more energy efficient as and when needed. A national evaluation by us earlier this year found that for home improvement services, save around £7,000 for every fall prevented. They generate £4.56 of value for every pound spent, and they reduce hospital discharge from 15 days to 9 days. But what we still weren't able to do was find out whether racially minoritized communities were accessing or benefiting from these services equitably. National data is extremely limited, and ethnicity monitoring is weak or voluntary, meaning the scale of inequality remains largely hidden. And when inequality is not visible, it's not addressed. Um, I wanted to carve out a little bit of time before going into the findings to give space to why these figures are the way they are. These inequalities, they're not accidental. They are the results of decades of discriminatory housing policy and practice across all 10 years. From the 60s onwards, racial steering, redlining, and exclusionary lettings policies pushed people into segregated neighborhoods with poorer quality housing and fewer resources. And that legacy continues today. Many racially minoritized households remain concentrated in the most deprived areas, facing overcrowding, damp, and unsafe conditions. And low rates of home ownership amongst Black African and Black Caribbean communities mean higher reliance on the PRS and substandard social housing. Economic inequality reinforces this further. Racially minoritized people are still 2 to 3 times more likely to be living in deep poverty, limiting their ability to maintain or improve their homes. And I think that unless we acknowledge this history, we can't design solutions that are genuinely equitable. So we spoke to participants across England, older people from racially minoritized communities, and these were the themes that came up. Barriers to access and use was a key one. Home improvement services vary dramatically by postcode, and while some people receive life-changing support through adaptations and improvements, others receive nothing. And one key route, the Disabled Facilities Grant, lacks robust data on who receives this support and how effective it is and whether outcomes are equitable. And this leaves a major gap in accountability. The role of housing tenure also shapes access and stability. Tenure affects not only physical housing conditions, but also emotional security and access to support. Many participants, whether they were homeowners or social tenants or rented privately, had lived in their homes for decades, yet still faced uncertainty about repairs and adaptations. And with 1 in 10 pensioners having no savings and high rates of poverty among these groups, many people simply can't afford to fund essential improvements. The third was around trust and cultural relevance. This was central to the experiences that people had. Um, for many, mistrust of institutions, although it's framed and has been framed historically as a personal failing, for the people that we spoke to, it was a rational response to their lived experience. People wanted services that were safe, respectful, and engaging with their lived realities. And community organizations, the groups already embedded within those neighborhoods, were repeatedly highlighted as trusted intermediaries. And so to deliver equitable housing support, these organizations must be recognized and funded as essential partners. Um, Really quickly, I don't want to take too much more time, but the fourth was around health, aging, and mobility, and how aging is not experienced equally across communities. And poor health begins earlier for many racially minoritized groups. So 1 in 10 Pakistani people report bad health, as quick as age 53. For Bangladeshi people, it's at 51. And for white British people, this point doesn't typically arrive until the age of 65. So this means some communities live more than a decade longer in poorer health, making accessible, safe housing even more critical. And when I talk about housing, I'm not talking about specialist housing for older people. I'm talking about the mainstream existing housing that they are most likely to be living in. And then the final couple of themes that came up was, as you can imagine, structural inequalities and the intersecting barriers that it comes with. So people describe delays, dismissals, and unequal treatment, and some experience direct racism, and others experience it more subtly. Shelters, national data confirms that Black and Black mixed households face racism throughout the housing system, from allocations to frontline interactions. And when racism intersects with disability, poverty, class, or immigration status, the impact is even more severe. And place also matters. You know, austerity hit the poorest local authorities the hardest. These are the same areas where racially minoritized communities are concentrated. And many participants described things like crime, neglect, and a sense that no one was investing in their neighborhood. And finally, systems assume English fluency and digital literacy. Um, and many people struggle to access services not because they lacked motivation, but because the systems were simply not designed for them. So they're not stories of disengagement, they're stories of exclusion. I'm just going to move. So, whilst our report outlined recommendations for national and local stakeholders, for today, I just wanted to focus on a few that I think collaboration with NRH or other stakeholders in this call could be really powerful. The first is on fixing the data gap. Government, we want departments like MHCLG and DHSC to collect and publish data on who is accessing nationwide schemes like the Disabled Facilities Grant and retrofit programs, including ethnicity and outcomes. Without this, inequality stays invisible. We want simplified access to grants. Older and racially minoritized households are disproportionately affected by complexity and gatekeeping, and we need locally rooted models such as good home hubs that can provide trusted, accessible support. And we want to target investment where decline is greatest. So it should prioritize areas with high deprivation and high racially minoritized populations, preventing further neighborhood decline. Now, I know that this was a little bit tangented from the topic at hand today in the session, but um, I think that I've spoken about social justice today in the lens of older racially minoritized communities. And I think that, my personal view is that any national agenda to improve the country's housing stock should start their thinking with the people who are most impacted, and then the bricks and mortar second, and that person focused approach. So I'm going to pass to Alistair now, and I'm happy to, once I figured out how to unshare my screen. There
Well,
we go.
while you're doing that, I think just to say thank you for that. I think it was really insightful and very much aligned with lots of the key messages that will come out. Like for those of you who on the call aren't familiar with the work of the Centre for Aging Better around the Good Homes Hub, I really recommend that you do, because if you're interested in one-stop shops, then you're interested in Good Homes Hubs. So there's a lot of alignment, and I think those principles are really important. And I do think that sometimes these are tough questions that we must address like head on. So thank you very much for sharing it so openly with us. And that's why we asked you, because we know that there's a lot of knowledge that you've been working really hard, and we think that our network would be really, really keen to hear about it. So we appreciate it, Nazia. Thank you. And last but not least, we're going to hand over to Alistair.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you, everybody. It's really great to be here, and thank you, Emma and Nazia, for the kind of sobering but radical ideas that we don't have enough of in the world at the moment. So I really appreciate that. I'm not going last because I've got the solutions, by the way. I'm going last. I have a
Damn
slightly,
it.
I wouldn't step in and do that, and I have a slightly different, perhaps the idea is a different lens to share. So. Can we see that?
Yeah,
Awesome. Is it full screen?
it's getting there. There you go. Perfect.
Great. All right. I'll try and stick to 10 minutes or less. So I'm going to talk about ethics. That's my pet topic alongside architecture. I'm a qualified architect. I run a small practice called Collective Works. I do work across a number of sort of activist groups and steering groups like Architects Declare, ACAN, where I met Rachel, Sarah, and many others here. Prior to that, I was at a large practice and a small charity. So I've worked across different parts of the architectural profession, but constantly I've been looking at the thread of like, how can we be better architects, better for society? How can we reduce inequality rather than increase it? My practice collective works. I'm in the office today. That's a view. We don't always work at night, you'll be pleased to hear. I think that was taken in a winter evening like today. There's 9 of us in the practice now, myself, Kazema and Syria, the founders. We're really motivated by the collaborations that we can spark and the number of different sectors that we work across. I'm going to share some of the retrofit work that we do for context before I talk about ethics more specifically. This is a mid-terrace retrofit, which we did for a private client a couple of years ago. They received a rebate on their energy bills after completion. It received a great air tightness rate. We used screw piles, a number of low carbon materials. We're very proud of it, but we also recognize that this level of retrofit is not accessible nationwide. We're also working on a retrofit for clients Linda and Neil out in the Ride in Hatfield. This one's hopefully going on site in the next couple of months. So there's a few active projects like this on the drawing board. We also do some community-led retrofit, and if the Places team are looking for somewhere to visit, I'd highly recommend the Remakery down in Brixton. It was a derelict garage through 2011 and 2012 until Transition Town Brixton got hold of it and did a community-led retrofit with some funding from Lambeth and a number of community volunteers. That is open and successful to this day, and they've now had a small amount of extra funding, so we're helping them to do some more insulation to the rear space, the delivery space, and some general upgrades. So if you're interested in kind of community-led retrofit around South London, go and have a look at the Remakery. It's a lovely project. But retrofit and ethics. So because of this kind of interest in ethics, in the last 5 years or so, I've been working with the RIBA on how to champion a more ethical practice across the industry. That led me to write the RIBA's Ethical Practice Guide alongside Caris Rowlands, a lawyer and barrister. And for the recent Retrofit 25 exhibition, I was asked kind of where do retrofit and ethics overlap? So I looked through the book and tried to work out the particular points where you could see retrofit as an ethical responsibility. And I've listed some of those out on the side here. The book's structured around 6 duties, which comes from architects' codes. But those duties are duty to the wider world, society, the client, to those in the workplace, to the profession, and to oneself. And where those things intersect with ethics is really that, our duty to the wider world is to reduce emissions, reduce biodiversity loss, and understand the responsibility that we have in the built environment. Duty to society is about engaging communities, hopefully reducing displacement from regeneration projects, and also maximising social value. Our duty to the client is really the client's long-term interest, so that'll often, mean explaining to a client that it's better in the long term for them to really invest in their built environment and make, go beyond refurbishment and go to retrofit. The duty to the workplace is about recognizing the supply chain issues that often occur both in materials and people, recognizing that modern slavery is a real issue in the UK's construction supply chain, and just hopefully increasing green jobs as a solution to economic stagnation. The duty to the profession and the duty to oneself are rarely discussed, but the duty to the profession that we have is really to share the knowledge that we have in forums like this. The National Retrofit Hub is really sharing knowledge across a really broad stakeholder group. So that's a positive thing. And also for architects to generally improve their own reputation by doing good work and becoming more trusted. Certainly in light of the Grenfell disaster, it's important that our reputation is protected and upheld. There's a couple of quotes in this book. I've picked out one here from Finn Harper. He suggests there, or they suggest there, that the UK needs to urgently invest in massive improvements to its housing stock. The way forward lies in upgrading existing buildings rather than demolishing them from scratch. So we've had certainly a number of people repeating why retrofit is better than demolition and new build. Another more recent article or a more recent thing to highlight is 216 of the Ethical Consumer magazine from a couple of months ago. It is really focused on retrofit and how climate change how that fight can begin at home. So I've included this here and a link to that. So if you do want to go and read that, it's a slightly shorter read than my book, but does certainly tie into some of the very key decisions that you might make and the ethical lenses that they have, including the look at forced labour in the solar panel supply chain, and a number of things, especially around the energy suppliers that you'll be interested in if you want to see the ethics come through. Typical ethical issues. Ethics is a low consensus subject, because it's very subjective based on your own moral position and where you're working. Many issues will come up, and sometimes there'll be an issue for you and not necessarily for your colleagues. But this is the kind of questions that we see as dilemmas for the retrofit industry. my client wants to avoid paying VAT by paying in cash. What do I do there? That's perhaps understandable, but still not necessarily a good plan. Should I work for free on a retrofit project? Arguably, working for free on a community-led retrofit is a better idea than working for free on an international competition, but it's still working for free. It still pushes the value down across the industry. Should you present a deep retrofit option if the client haven't asked for one or if they can't afford one? How far do you go with these things? So these are the kind of questions that I think we are all probably asking ourselves in our organizations and in our work. There are some solutions, and I would point to the idea of a decision tree, and the Institute for Business Ethics provide these kind of frameworks. So this is the stop and think model. If you do get a difficult decision, if you do find your moral hackles raised, maybe ask yourself, well, is it in line with our values? Would I be comfortable explaining the decision I'm taking to everybody I know? Would this be acceptable if everybody did it? These are the kind of prompts that help people reflect on their ethical positioning. One thing that we do at Collective Works is kind of a recent installation, but it's when we take on new projects, it's trying to assess them through an ethical lens, just to say, let's not just do all the work that we're offered, but let's actually ask a question of it. Does it meet our mission? Is it aligned with our kind of, the sectors that we're trying to work in? Does it fill a knowledge gap or a services gap? Is it something that's going to help us upskill? Is it, do we urgently need the money? That's not the first question, it's the fourth question, but it's a question that you ask yourself when you're looking at new projects. But also then just give an opportunity for people in your organization to raise ethical questions or ethical concerns if they have them, because not everybody will be comfortable necessarily working on particular projects or with particular client bases. So this is one way to kind of embed ethics in your organization, is actually just to discuss the work you're doing quite consistently as you take it on. Codes of conduct. You'll all be very familiar with various codes of conduct across the profession and across the organizations you work with. Sadly, as this very detailed table shows, they're very much inconsistent. So the planner in your team, the chartered architect in your team, the landscape architect in your team, the structural engineer in your team, the services engineer in your team, all of these different people will be held up to different codes of conduct. And so for clients or for people who are hoping to get good retrofit delivered, they'll often be working with a team who are in slightly different places. So I think if codes are going to be useful, they've got to be unified. And there's a kind of question later on about whether we need a sort of a unified code for retrofit. What is it that retrofit is consistent on? There are many ethical frameworks out there: virtue ethics, social contract ethics, duty ethics, utilitarian ethics, most very historic. They all point in different directions around decision making, around it's about being a good person, or whether it's about recognizing your social contract, recognizing the duties you should take in each place, or creating the most amount of good in a certain situation. They all kind of intersect and overlap, and they don't always show a clear way forward. I've jokingly did this slide for a talk a few months ago that says, look, really the answer is retrofit, whether you're looking through a virtue, utilitarian or deontological lens. Arguably retrofit is most of the time a more sustainable solution and has better outcomes. So that would be one way. The other way is to look at an ethics of care. And I think retrofit in a way is a practice of care. The ethics of care is a newer feminist framework that looks at human feelings relations rather than purely justice and rights. It's less abstract than the models that the old white folk on the previous slide sort of suggested, and it's more about kind of how can we be relational in our decision making, how can we be very much grounded and situated in the work that we're doing. So it very much leads to the question how to respond in each scenario. So if you're interested in ethics of care, look up Carol Gilligan, Virginia Held and Joan Tronto to go a little bit further. So we're going to have an open session now, and I know there'll be prompts in the room, but I just thought, while summarizing here, what are the shared ethics of the retrofit sector? It's a big, broad sector. You already have a lot of good guidance, a lot of good codes, a lot of good learning, but is there a shared ethics across the sector, and could you usefully define that somewhere? Who actively takes responsibility for the other in retrofit? The other's an ethical sort of framework for talking about not being self-interested and considering other people, other beings, other animals, other things that share the planet. Who really is practicing in others' interest in retrofit? What are the hidden harms of poor retrofit? We've heard from Nazia the hidden harms of poor housing broadly. Clearly, doing retrofit slightly badly is not a great idea. And then what are the societal impacts of delaying national retrofit? So we can look at the reasons to kind of get on with it, but the longer it takes to upgrade the homes, what are the impacts that we're seeing? So these are some prompts, and I hope that's been a useful overview on ethics.
Yes, it has. Thank you very much. Um, there's so much that we can get into in the breakouts. And I'm going to do some things slightly weird on timings. But Ben, if you can um, get those breakout rooms going, and then each of the National Retrofit Hub people, if you can share your screen in the breakout session. I think, Talisa, you're going to support Rachel because Rachel has to leave a little early. And then if you bring us back into the main room at like 22 or 23 minutes past, just to get the most out of our time together. And then we'll do a super short update back to the room just to say thank you and goodbye and what the next steps are. So just to maximize the time that we have got in the breakout sessions. And just feel free, people in those rooms, just like throw down ideas. There's no right answer here. And if it's just that you want to throw in your own feeling or thought about what you've heard today, that's also okay. We just want to hear from you. We always like to check in with our network. So yeah.
I'll open those now, and you should be able to move to a room if you're in the wrong one.
Okay.
But yeah, I'll open those now.
Thank you. Trying to get the comments down quick and fast. There is lots of really great insight from all of you coming through, and we've got 7 minutes left before we said we'd let everybody go. So what I wanted to just do is ask each, if there's a representative from each of the breakout rooms, to just give a minute on the things that arose, and I don't mind starting. I think the main bit of, I'm sorry, I should say, we were speaking in the retrofit and climate resilience work breakout room. And I think there was a general consensus around our role as the NRH when it comes to any topic, really, whether it's climate resilience that we're talking about, is in that feedback loop space between practice and policy, and to strengthen that. And I think we're hearing that loud and clear. So where policy is maybe being written in isolation of the realities of practice, and to really try and strengthen those, and also to strengthen partnerships between other professional organizations as well. So that's really aligned with how we would like to be focusing anyway. And then in terms of the topic itself, I think there was some questions alluding to, dare I say, like the definition of retrofit and what futures we're designing for, and what within resilience, as in a zoomed out perspective, we should be talking about and building maybe some tools and useful insights around. So we've heard that. And what I would say is that there were other people in the room who didn't have a chance to speak. And please, if after the fact you think of something, drop us a line and we will be catching those thoughts and feeding that into the direction of travel for our work moving forward. So yeah, that is a really, really quick summary of our group. Jason, do you want to, who were you in with, Alistair? Do you want to do super quick?
Yeah, I was in with Alistair, so we were looking at retrofit and ethics. I think something that we spoke about at the end was around funding, and that many people in the sector are wanting to deliver sort of the best retrofit possible, but that they're capped because funding normally stops at an EPCC or a level. So if they have the ability to deliver above that, then the funding will not pay for those measures. So therefore, there's an ethical quandary within that of wanting to deliver more in that space, but sort of the funding possibly not letting them. So that was sort of a conversation we were having quite deeply at the end, sort of the want to deliver more, but sort of the way in which the funding was working with many of the organizations not sort of allowing them to. And we also had some conversations around sort of the passive house model and how that's monitored, and all of the steps that go through to make sure that measures are actually sort of monitored at the beginning and the end, and make sure that everything is correct from design all the way through. Sorry, that's a very short nugget of quite an in-depth
No,
conversation. So I'm just trying to be as
that's
quick as
no, that's great. That's really great, Jason. And I think just, to summarize or to say as well to back that up, somebody had asked if they can still add notes to the Miro, and if you want to, we will leave the Miro open. You can get back into it and leave any comments after that as well, and build on some of the reflections that you've heard just now from Jason, and anything else that you've heard from today. So thanks, Jason. And then Talisa, am I throwing you
Um,
under a bus, or are you good?
yeah, I'm good. So we were talking about social justice, and so there's a lot of focus on what sort of deliver benefits retrofit can deliver beyond energy efficiency and stuff, as we know. But then also, I think we sort of highlighted a really important tension that kind of was coming up between being able to deliver retrofit at the pace and scale that we need, but also being able to like have the breathing room and the space to be able to make sure that we're actually targeting people and that we don't just end up doing retrofitting the most easiest or along with the people who can afford it first, but that pace and scale, yeah, also enables us to um, target the most vulnerable. And then we also spoke a bit at the end about kind of like whole street approach and neighborhood approach and sort of hyperlocal delivery, being able to identify the kind of social justice needs that we need to address in retrofit, which also actually reminded me a bit of some of the research happening at EDLC on how retrofit and housing used to become sort of part of the welfare state, which I think is also interesting for thinking about how retrofit and social justice align. But yeah, I'm trying to be quick, so that was a very quick summary, and though yeah, but there's very
Thank
quick
you.
pause.
No, that's really, really helpful. And I think what we also have been talking a lot about internally is a shift away in our thinking, and probably not a lot of you think like this, so you're going to think, yes, of course, but shifting away from a linear checkbox, one and done approach to retrofit, but into a system of care and repair that is cyclical and ongoing and consistent and present in communities and in places, so that it isn't just seen as a sort of a swoop in and out, but actually we're talking really here about caring for our built environment and ensuring that the conditions that people are living in are safe and secure and just. So I think that's really important. And it's 29 minutes past 1, and we're going to be able to let you go on time. We really appreciate your time and contributions, and we know it's nearly the end of the year, and also I don't know about you, but I got screen fatigue. So it's difficult to come to endless meetings, but we really cannot express how much we appreciate your contributions and showing up and being part of this network, because you are what we are. So thank you, and thank you to our speakers for excellent presentations. And we'll do a roundup email where we can share the presentation and possibly their slides if they're willing. So thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful rest of your week. Stay warm, enjoy the sunshine. Speak soon. Thank you.